All right, I'll start. Thank you for joining our webinar on employee benefits presented by the Belgian American Chamber of the South. I would like to start by thanking Mr. Wayne Anderson of Total Employee Benefits and Mr. Michel Vanesse of Parker Poe for participating. Mr. Anderson will start with tackling the Great Resignation in his presentation and give a general introduction to employee benefits. Mr. Vanesse will elaborate on all the legal pitfalls that we may encounter when you as an employer offer employee benefits. There are things to take into account to be compliant with the laws. During the presentation, you can ask questions in the chat, and Mr. Vanesse and Mr. Anderson will go in discussion at the end of their presentation. I've chatted with Mr. Vanesse and Anderson before while preparing the webinar, and these guys are really knowledgeable when it comes to the world of employee benefits. So ask away all your questions in the chat. The chamber in its whole couldn't be possible without our members. So we would like to thank all our sponsors for supporting us. If you like what we do, and such as webinars like this to inform the Belgian American business community of all kinds of things, you can always become a member. Visit www.bacos.us for that, or email us at info@bacos.us. Without further ado, I would like to announce or give the floor to Mr. Wayne Anderson of Total Employee Benefits.
Thank you so much, Bram. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen here. So hopefully you can see there. Very good. Well, the subject that as we were talking about we're going to talk about employee benefits and various things to think about. I think addressing what's really going on in the marketplace today with employees is what we've been calling the Great Resignation. I know you're all aware employees have been leaving their jobs in record numbers over the past several months. This has been called the Great Resignation. Our approach at our agency to look at this problem at Total Employee Benefits is to build strategies to help our clients work toward what we like to call the Great Retention. The first step in the process is identifying and understanding the problem. Record numbers of employees quit their jobs during November of 2021. We haven't seen those kind of numbers since 2000. Some wanted a career change, some wanted a better work-life balance, and others started their own business. In any good relationship, personal or business, healthy two-way communication is very important. Have you ever considered surveying your employees to get a better understanding of their needs, challenges, and their goals? I would suggest asking only those questions you're prepared to address in the company. A good survey with anonymous responses will provide you very valuable information. Building a strategy for addressing the Great Resignation starts with understanding why employees are leaving. I'll review a few reasons we're seeing from various surveys. The pandemic caused employees to begin thinking about their work life and home life in a different way. For so many, work moved to home, and for families, children were attending school from home. This changed households' daily routines, disrupted social interaction, and caused employees to rethink their personal and professional priorities. Employees have become more interested in being with a company that matches their personal values, one that possesses a particular benefits are becoming more than just the typical health and welfare plans and retirement plans that we're used to seeing. Employees are looking for more creative benefits that help them with their personal and professional goals. Some of these include fitness, better access to mental health therapy, assistance with furnishing their home with office space, better, more affordable health care, child care assistance, and a more secure home internet, just to name a few of the important needs that we've seen in surveys. During this time of record levels of inflation, employees are seeking competitive compensation, opportunity for growth, and advancement for long-term rewards that fit their goals. The road to building your great retention strategy is a process. Through this process, you can build a stronger relationship between you, the employer, and the employees, who are a very important part of your success. Don't feel like you have to do this alone. It's important to engage professionals in the benefits, human resources, and legal field who can assist you in building what we call the great retention. Understanding the full life cycle of an employee's tenure and planning for it will help you build success in every stage of the employee's time with your company. Remember, all good relationships are built on strong two-way communication and the willingness to adapt to change. As I mentioned earlier, engaging professionals to help you with your strategy and execution of a successful retention strategy will make all the difference in the time you're investing, results of the work, and keeping compliant with various regulations, fiduciary responsibilities, and tax considerations. Michel Vanesse, attorney with Parker Poe, is here with me to discuss some very important considerations as you continue moving forward with your plan. Now, the slide you'll see here has several aspects of how you might engage professionals and several areas that Michel focuses on in his practice. And with that, I want to kind of turn it over to Michel and get his thoughts on these items and things you should consider as you're building this retention strategy.
Okay, well, thank you, Wayne, for those careful thoughts about employment and, of course, the consideration for employment, which is not just compensation or bonuses, but also benefits. And I first want to clarify, I suppose Bram, either now or after the call, will share with you some materials that I shared with Wayne and Bram that are way more than we can cover conceivably in 1 hour of talking about benefits. But my consideration for doing that was that I thought that the audience, or the target audience at least, there may be others on the phone, of course, but would be either Belgian companies already in the US or planning to come in the US or growing in the US, or vice versa, maybe a US company with interest in going to Belgium and what it means, in other words, to become, quote, international in scope. And so all these decks that will become available to you if they are not already, are clearly giving you, my intent at least, was that they would give you an overview of most things that we touch upon when we talk in the US about employee benefits, and of course, doing it right, not just in an efficient way, meaning doing it right business-wise, but also doing it right legally, so there are no penalties or tax inefficiencies or other, lawsuit potentials, which we clearly don't want. And so that's why I gave Bram maybe a a lot more than could conceivably be covered here. But what I do intend to do is refer to those as we speak, so that after this hour spent together, if there is something I said that made you go, oh, I would like to know more about this, you probably will find some level of discussion of those topics in one or more of the decks that will be available to you. And so the key point to start a discussion about this for certainly European companies coming here, by European, I mean, maybe continental Europe, maybe less England, because that's a common law country, but most of the countries in continental Europe work under the civil law type of jurisprudence and whatnot. So it's a very different approach to things. And specifically when you talk about benefits, having grown in Belgium myself, my parents are still in Belgium, and I see how they live in retirement now. A lot of the benefits come from the Belgian government. The pension comes from the Belgian government, health coverage comes from the Belgian government, and they had that while they were employees in Belgium. In the US, an employer, as Wayne already indicated, has to play a significantly more important role, an active role, in providing the workforce with benefits. And of course, the concept of what benefits are, as Wayne indicated, is currently expanding and morphing into something different, which causes benefits to become very much a focus these days for employers and certainly their HR department. And so to give you the highest level legal perspective on all of this, what Europeans need to realize when they come here, in addition to the fact that they're going to have to deal with employee benefits probably more than they did in Belgium, is that US laws have a different reach. There is a technical term for this that lawyers use, and I'll drop it just so you remember. For tax laws, most countries in Europe adopt what is called a territorial approach to taxes, meaning they care about taxes for what is done within their territory. The tax code in the US has what is called, again, by lawyers and for lawyers, a universal approach. That just the word already is conveying to you that they don't think they're limited by their own borders. And what that means is that if you are a US taxpayer, as defined in the US tax code, wherever you are in the world, you are to report to the IRS with your annual tax return. That means that if you are a US citizen living and working in Belgium full-time, even if you don't spend a minute in the US in a particular year, you are a US taxpayer and you must file a return with the US. And that, of course, also applies to corporations, meaning to employers. So when you think about benefits and what you're doing here in the US for people you hire locally, on the US market, but also for people that may travel, is that US laws may actually potentially hit someone who is in Belgium for the whole year. And so, again, when you design benefit plans and whatnot, and you have a presence on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, that is why you need to think about the US laws maybe even more than you think. Also, there is a key statute in benefits that it's an acronym, and it's called ERISA. It's ERISA, and it stands for the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Inevitably, when employers have to play a big role in providing employees with pension and healthcare, historically, there have been some employers that became truly bad apples, meaning they promised benefits to employees when they retired, and then they were unable to provide because they went bankrupt or whatnot. So there's been really catastrophic stories in the US decades ago. I'm talking maybe the 40s, 50s, 60s. And so in the 70s, Congress adopted this statute to say, look, dear employer, you have to adopt these plans for your employees for pension and health. You cannot do whatever you want. We're going to create obligations to fund tax vehicles, trusts, so that when people do retire, there will be money for them. So everything comes from that. And a lot of the statutory activity that Congress engages in comes from the fact that there is in Washington this lack of trust, pardon the pun, that employers will deliver when the time has come. And so as a result of that, everyone out there running a business is now subject to multiple layers of compliance requirement just to protect employees effectively. And then you heard me use the word trust, which is of course a very common concept in America or in England. In Belgium, in Belgian law, French law, German law, Italian law, Spanish law, there is no concept of trust. It doesn't even exist. So when you come here, you will be confronted to that concept, which is a common law concept, and you will need to become familiar with what that means. So here we are now, you start your business in the US, you start hiring, you hear from everyone, Wayne and others, that, well, look, I mean, you need to keep your employees happy. You don't want them to come work for you for 3 weeks and go because you don't take care of them, which is undeniably true. And then you're going to start asking about, well, what kind of pension plan, retirement plan, health plan, do I need to provide? You turn to experts, people like Wayne, people like me, to tell you, well, this is market. And I'll tell you, well, you can't do this, you cannot do that because of the law. And because of ERISA, a lot of the benefits must be funded, meaning that money will need to leave your coffers as an employer and land in a trust where some financial institution is going to keep an eye on these assets for the greater good of the participants. I mean, it's not always a financial institution. It can be an employee, frankly, can be designated as a trustee as well, which is understandable with smaller outfits. But as I'm about to explain in a few minutes, need to be understood by the person who agrees to be a trustee. Because behind the concept of a trust is the concept of managing the assets in the trust, not for the employer, but for the employees. And so whoever is managing these assets is acting for the benefit of someone else, meaning the employees. That is the concept of a trustee, or more broadly, of what is called in US law, a fiduciary. So whoever, and I'm here to tell you, whoever, whether appointed or not, designated or not, named or not, whoever is actively engaging in keeping an eye on that trust, making sure money goes in, how it is administered, making sure money goes out for benefit payments when, of course, someone is actually entitled to it, and not when someone is not entitled to it. All of that are actions that are looked at by American law as actions by a fiduciary. And a fiduciary, I'm here also to tell you, is not necessarily some vague entity. the law is really focusing on, the human who is actually doing these things. And that person will be personally liable if things go wrong under their watch. Now, you can get organized around that. You can make sure, as we say amongst lawyers, to build Chinese walls to make sure that this liability does not spread in many places where suddenly people are held liable for things they didn't even know existed. But that takes organization. And so I'm going to take a pause now, because this is where I need to refer to a couple of these decks you will receive. A lot of what I'm talking about now appears in a couple of decks dealing with retirement plans and what we call governance, plan governance, which is really what how those plans are run. And that's where the law can really guide you in terms of what is needed. And so for foreigners coming here, that we assist as they begin to grow and to hire and to offer business, one of the first seminar we typically have as lawyers is to educate them about what it is that they do with respect to benefits that can be considered an employer activity, meaning not a fiduciary activity, for which they can think with their employer hat, and that's it. And so it's a zone of comfort, because that's what employers typically do. I'm building my business. What do I do? What can I do, etc. But once a plan has been designed, written down, and starts to be run or implemented, somebody will be the fiduciary. Under ERISA, there actually has to be a, quote, named fiduciary. So the plan document will have to say that. But ERISA goes on to say, now, if you don't follow what the plan says, which is first and foremost never good, always follow plan terms. But if you happen to not do that, maybe because you forget what the plan said, because people have come and gone, there's a loss of institutional knowledge, and now somebody else, maybe in a different function, has said, well, I can do this. I'm familiar with that stuff. Let me do that. That person will become what is called, again, by lawyers, a fiduciary in fact, meaning they're not appointed, they're not named, they're just doing it. And if they're doing it, they're a fiduciary like everybody else being a fiduciary. Same liability, same standard. So now let's talk about that standard. When you are wearing your fiduciary hat, which is for things like, is someone eligible to enter my plan? Is someone eligible to accrue a benefit under my plan? Is someone eligible to actually receive a benefit under my plan that the trust will pay for? All these actions are fiduciary actions. So what is the standard? Is it just normal negligence? And if you do it right, just the way you generally do things in your life, can you be held not responsible? Well, the answer is no. It is a higher standard. It is, to cut a long story short, because the verbiage in ERISA is actually quite long, describing the liability you can be subject to. We call that a prudent expert standard. So you might have guessed prudent. Obviously, none of us should act imprudently. But whoever is acting as a fiduciary is supposed to be, is presumed to be an expert in that area, an expert. So you think about your organization, you think about who typically is in your HR committee or benefits committee, and if you even have a committee, or who is kind of randomly deciding these things, that person is deemed to be an expert. And if that expert is not prudent, and by prudent, not for themselves, of course, because remember, they're fiduciaries, but prudent for the participants, then they're safe. If they can be deemed imprudent, they could be personally liable. So there is a whole deck on that, on how to get organized. And I think that is probably one of the very first steps in terms of, foreigners coming to the US to start a business, hiring people locally, and figuring out, okay, what am I supposed to do here in the US that I wasn't doing over there in Belgium or France, Germany, whatever. That's a first change, is that they realize there are times where I'm wearing different hats and I need to think differently in terms of what I'm doing. So all of that is explained in more details in those decks, but as you might imagine, documenting who is supposed to do what and then sticking to it is basically the advice, right? And by the way, another requirement of ERISA is that all your benefit plans must be reduced in writing. You need to have a comprehensive plan document, and then you need to run the plan the way it is written. If you don't do that, there is ERISA violations, and there can be, frankly, tax penalties too, because it's also a tax vehicle. So there you have it. That's why you need to think about your plan with two important things. A, really know your documents. And actually, you should have a document to begin with. So if you start realizing, well, I'm not sure I have, that would be the first step towards improving the situation. And then knowing that running plans, whether it's retirement or health, usually results in fiduciary activities that you need to pay attention to. And I think, Wayne, you may have a comment.
Well, I was thinking about that, and as you raise all of these compliance areas to be concerned about, there is sort of a phase-in approach that you could think about, and that is, let's say you're coming into the US and you're going to be adding 10 employees and then 20 and then 40, and you're looking at ramping up. One of the things that can be done is putting you into, for example, your health and welfare benefit programs fully insured and not self-funded, moving some of that fiduciary responsibility, reducing it and making it more seamless and a little easier to build. The other thing is, on the retirement side, you can involve having TPAs, a third-party administrator is what that is, who helps with some of those ERISA requirements. Yes, they'll charge a little fee. They're going to be engaged as a third party with you to help manage that. And I'm sure Michel's worked with plenty of those in the past, but there's a way to do this where you're, when you're getting into it, you don't have to feel like you have this weight on your shoulders as you are ramping up a business here in the US that is so heavily compliant and heavy on the fiduciary side. Now, it is, if you're coming here and you're going to ramp up 300, 500 employees really fast, you're a type of plan that has a very, very robust, already built retirement goals and health plan. What I often do with companies like that is again, that phased in approach of trying to look at what is your risk tolerance? What do you want to manage as a fiduciary? What can Michel and I do together as a team and with your human resource professional, be it an internal or external party, and make sure that we've got all the dots, the I's dotted and T's crossed from a plan document standpoint, that we've got your plan in place with all the paperwork, so to speak. I'll be a little less technical than Michel on that, but because it can be overwhelming when you think about all the requirements here. But I guess the message is, it's not a one size fits all. We have to tailor solutions for smaller companies and for companies that have that growth pattern, and then larger ones. It's a whole different ballgame.
That is very useful, Wayne, and I appreciate your raising that point. Actually, with the pandemic and the many sometimes non-benefit questions, but pure employment questions that HR departments have to handle these days, I actually see or hear, I guess, more about HR execs that basically tell me that their team is literally overwhelmed with the constant changes and how to adapt to the pandemic, just for, as Wayne indicated, for work type environment questions, not to mention the very cryptic questions about, do I have a right to mandate vaccine or to prohibit vaccine, or, you know, what about religious exemptions? And, you know, there's a whole host of questions that are also HR questions that really cause HR folks to be overwhelmed these days. Not to mention temporary statutes that gave sometimes, you know, longer periods to do certain things to help employees, which of course, again, cause HR folks to have to adapt. So there actually is, to now get to Wayne's point, more of a need for outsourcing, not just a want to outsource to maybe shield yourself from fiduciary liabilities, which is number one, but now two, to just get plain help, because it's just too much. So all of that is definitely pushing people towards professionals to help them out on the retirement or health. And so one thing that I want to point out too is that the fiduciary, and that may indirectly respond to some questions I see in the chat. The fiduciary question around plans is one that really never ends. To take the simplest example, even though implementing this simplest concept is incredibly complicated, is of course that most plans these days are plans where employees take responsibility for their retirement savings. In other words, employers in the US less and less promise a pension, where they tell employees, when you retire, we will have the money to pay you effectively an annuity until you die. So don't worry about it if you live 2 years or 50 years. We will pay you until you die some benefit. We call that a defined benefit plan because it's defined in the plan, the benefit the employer will pay. Those are on the decline. What is on the rise, of course, for now, maybe 30, 40 years, are 401k plans, which are really just retirement savings vehicles, where the employee is putting their money in, and of course the employer can supplement, but then it's an account balance. And the only thing the employee will get when they retire is what's in the account balance. Well, guess what? The employer will be the fiduciary in whole or in part, again, going back to Wayne's point, but the employer is the ongoing fiduciary to make sure that this 401k plan provides good investment options, that it's diversified for all ages, young and old, that the funds are not charging fees that are way above market. And believe me, there are many lawsuits for that. There is an entire plaintiff's bar that is looking for these things, and then they're filing class actions. And then, you know, every participant gets $10, but the attorney is getting a third of the whole thing. It's a dangerous thing that you don't want to handle casually. Again, it might be a good idea to seek professional help. There are outfits out there that agree to be co-fiduciaries. I emphasize co-fiduciaries. In other words, you're never done completely being, at least in part, a fiduciary. Why? Because selecting the help, selecting that provider, and how they get paid is itself a fiduciary action. Yes. So when you tell yourself as an employer, I have this 401k plan, people need to put money there, I'll put some match to incentivize them, and then I want to be done with this. Well, no, you're not. Because now you have to worry about what are the investment choices, and it's not a one-time thing. It is an ongoing thing, because a fund may start underperforming, and then if you keep it on your plan, you might become liable for that. Do you understand the fee structure? Because if it's way above market, you should notice that and basically say, well, hold on, I wouldn't do this for my, remember, you're supposed to be a prudent expert. So you're supposed to know about markets and fees. And so if you don't pay attention, literally, you might be held liable. And so the last thing I'm going to say about this, because it is a topic that providers like, the Fidelities of the world, the Vanguards of the world, the ADPs of the world are not supposed to worry about. It's not their job. But the question, they will send to you a services agreement, and they will say, well, you're the employer, sign, which of course you're saying, sure, I'm the employer, I'm supposed to sign. Well, that contract is actually a fiduciary action because you're implementing a plan and you're signing as a fiduciary. If in the document you say the employer is the named fiduciary, because typically that's the default, and then the agreement says, of course, you can appoint committees, you can delegate, you can do all kinds of things. Feel free to do that. We don't care, because they don't. They really don't care. It's not their job. They're servicing your plan. You are the fiduciary at first. So if you just say the employer is the named fiduciary, the question becomes, well, but remember, fiduciaries are human beings. So when you say the employer is the fiduciary, who the heck is that then? Well, here is the lawyer's response. Every director, each and every one of them, because the employer is the board of directors. So every director now is supposed to be a prudent expert in retirement or benefits matters. Can you say that about your board? I don't think any company can say that about the entire board. So when you see that in the document, it's fine. It's a good start. But then you need to think, all right, maybe I need resolutions to delegate this down to maybe a committee of people who actually know these things. And maybe it's a multiple answer, or do what Wayne suggested. It's like, well, maybe we need the help of a professional here. And then you need to hire a professional with their own services agreement. So that's sort of this ongoing thing that you absolutely need to think about, and is step number one of legal compliance. The rest, to quickly now go down, the rest of what we wanted to talk about is really compliance at the implementation level. And there, again, I cannot repeat that enough, because it's literally more than half of my livelihood comes from what I'm about to tell you. Literally more than half. Write your plan down fully, completely, in a compliant manner. And then, and that's the most important thing, run it the way it is written. Every week, I'm getting a call from an HR person that says, we have this provision in the plan, we didn't quite do that. We did something different operationally. Well, that's a violation of ERISA and the code. That's definitely not a bet the house moment, oh my God, we're going to go bankrupt. Not at all. There is nothing to really, truly sweat about. But you cannot leave it like this. In the event of an audit by the Department of Labor, or by the IRS, the tax authorities, or the employment authorities, they can impose penalties. So you need to have, to make sure that someone knows the plan and knows how operations match plan terms. That is true of the most regulated programs, which we call qualified plans. Because remember, given this background I gave you, the tax code became the instrument of Congress to incentivize employers first, then employees, but first employers, to give benefits to their employees in a way that is tax efficient for the employers, so they can deduct their taxes while giving something to the employees. What qualified means, literally in one sentence, is that when you have a qualified plan and you run it right, the money you put in as an employer can be deducted from the corporate tax return the year you put it in, which is good for the employer because you reduce your taxes. Meanwhile, it is tax deferred for the employee, which for a retirement plan, for example, it's only when the retirement benefit will be paid out that it will become taxable to the employee. So the Treasury, the US Treasury, with qualified plans is effectively losing money, right? I mean, you're deducting as the employer, so you're paying less taxes on certain dollars. These dollars land in a qualified plan and nobody pays taxes on them immediately. It's deferred. That is why there are an enormous amount of rules in the code to govern those things. Is because the IRS, the Treasury, is losing money effectively. It is allowing an immediate tax deduction by the employer and deferring taxes for the employee. So they only allow that if everything is run well. Obviously, there is a dollar amount. You cannot exceed some dollar amounts. And there is all kinds of things about, well, this is not just for the rich. It has to be for everyone in the company. We call them broad-based plans. Qualified plans have to be broad-based. So you have non-highly paid and highly paid getting more or less the same ratio of benefits. And you need to keep it that way. And then you say, well, great, then I can have, I guess, non-qualified plans for the real top of the house. And the answer is yes, you can. Those are indeed called non-qualified deferred comp plans. Well, unfortunately, there have also been scandals in the US more recently with executive level pay. And that led to legislation, specifically a code section. I'm not going to mention other code sections, but this one is big. It's 409 Cap A. 409A has been described as the ERISA of non-qualified plans. Why? One main thing. 409A for non-qual plans requires a plan document, comprehensive plan document, who's eligible, what kind of benefit, how does a benefit accrue, when does it become non-forfeitable, or when does it vest? And of course, for the IRS, when does it get paid? Because that is when I'm getting my taxes. So you have to write it down completely. If you don't have a document that is comprehensive, you have violations. And then, yet again, you have to run it the way it is written. So this is the main message, other than the fiduciary aspect and liability that is attached to that when you have a trust or a funding vehicle, is generally these days, with very, very few exceptions, there are, but very few, make sure you have a plan document, that you run it the way it is written. And by a plan document, when you think about it logically, what is the range of questions that a plan should cover? How does someone come in and when? Eligibility requirements. How does a benefit grow, which we call accruals of benefits? How does a benefit become really, really, truly earned or non-forfeitable, or again, vested, so that it's truly the employee's money? That should be in there. And then, of course, because that's a tax issue, when does it come out? And there are rules around all of that. And if your plan documents only cover certain things and not others, you probably don't have a good plan document. And then if you have a good plan document, but you do something else, you're operationally in trouble. So I think that those are the main points I want to address before we stop, maybe for questions. And so just to wrap it up, because Wayne certainly made an excellent point about the particular point in time we are with benefits, with the Great Resignation. or the great retention, as he put it himself, because that is indeed what I indirectly see. I mean, Wayne is probably more frontline than I am about this. I'm a lawyer, and so I'm more about compliance. But certainly these days, I see plan amendments or requests for plan amendments because things are changing. We want to do things differently. And because, as I said now many times, well, your benefit plans must be documented. Well, when you decide to change things, usually at some point in the process, a lawyer gets a call to say, all right, well, we discussed with the consultants, we did our analysis of competition and how we compare to our peers on the market. We feel we need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, then eventually you need to reduce it to writing. And that's typically where lawyers come to say, all right, well, this is the best way to write this down. But there is definitely, in case you're an employer out there wondering what the heck is happening in America right now, there is definitely, it's a brainstorming moment. Wayne, you may either agree or disagree with me, but I feel like there is this brainstorming moment for the entire employment relationship, even beyond benefits. But since we're talking about benefits, let's focus on that, where it's not so much anymore, all right, I need to maximize efficiency and productivity of my employees. How the heck do I do that? I mean, that of course remains relevant, but this retention aspect becomes more a question of how do I also make them happy, or at least happier? Would you agree with that?
I agree. The dynamic has shifted to the employee who is in control, and that is, that makes you have to rethink many things. It also makes providing benefits and these programs we're discussing more expensive at a time when a company may be either seeing growth or not, or seeing a decline. So you have to be really creative in balancing that, what you can afford as a business, and then what you can't afford not to do for your employees. So, and I want to make sure that, as we going through this, we get to, there is a question in the chat box, and we may have we broadly answered that to a point, but I know that Hans had a question about 401k plans and the relationship with ADP. They covered under fiduciary risk. I think that Michel, you did a very good job saying, well, you never can shift that over to another vendor or even an employee benefits consultant or an attorney. You're always still squarely in that fiduciary responsibility, right, especially on a 401k, more so than, say, a fully insured medical plan, which you can more easily build compliance pieces in.
Yes.
For the 401k throughout the year, there are disclosures you have to give employees. You have to have anti-discrimination testing to make sure that your plan isn't what they call top heavy, where the executives are the ones getting the largest amount of the benefit. And what I mean by that is specifically when you have a match on that 401k, and that match is not what we call a safe harbor match. It is one where, say it's just a 2%, for example, which would not be a safe harbor match. If you had your executives maxing out their 401k because they're highly compensated, and then the more frontline employees paid at a lower level are just not participating, you will start to get into a top-heavy situation. And at the end of the year, guess what the IRS does? They make you take that money back out, and of that 401k as an executive, pay taxes on it so that they level the playing field, at least from certain percentages of income, with those lower paid employees. Now, there are safe harbor positions you can put into place. They can potentially cost you more, but those safe harbor provisions will enable you to contribute, let those executives have some degree of top heaviness, as long as the plan is executed as it's written, as Michel said. So there are ways to mitigate risk. And so as we certainly dove very deep into the compliance area, and it is really, really important to do. I think that also knowing there are steps where your fiduciary risk is higher, and then there are areas where it's lower, and things you can do to mitigate that risk and get help. Don't go it alone. Certainly do not go it alone, because that's where you often will get yourself in trouble. And the cost for assistance is minimal relative to the potential penalties for being out of compliance. Michelle, I wanted to ask you a question that I didn't even prepare this in advance, so I didn't let you know this one was coming. But this is one where we will often in our processes, we think about our clients and things that we like to do from a process perspective. We'll create, say, an audit checklist, or we have certain best practices with regard to approaching these. And so does your firm, or do you typically work with other companies to help provide, for example, someone who's looking at either their health and welfare program or a 401k or any other retirement plan for that matter, that kind of provides them a guideline of a checklist of things they need to be looking for, from a plan document to communications to employees, to just all these steps. And I know you can't cover everything, but what I generally like to do is have some type of guideline that kind of helps us work as a team through that process of getting things compliant.
Yes, we do. Yeah, we certainly, Wayne's a good point. We certainly encourage basically internal audits, right? I mean, it's I think the phrase internal audits, meaning self-generated audits before the feds show up. I have to say that we definitely have products. The way it hits our law firm almost never is come right in, request what you need to request, and help us conduct a comprehensive audit of everything benefits and compensation that we might have, because we don't even know what we have. Because I mean, let's face it, when a business becomes diversified for a controlled group, you can have lines of business, and sometimes lines of business develop a life of their own, and they start to live and breathe without the rest of the company knowing what the heck's going on over there. And so the compliance people, whether it's the CFO or risk management people, starts to wonder, well, what the heck is happening in that vortex? And so we are sometimes sent, with some people like us, some people don't like us then, to basically go see under the hood what the heck is being done, if there are new benefits that are extended a little bit willy-nilly, on an ad hoc basis, which is never good. Never mind that sometimes they're not even documented. So there is definitely good practice to have the courage to say at some point, let's have an audit. Now, to answer your question a little bit more in detail, we definitely offer levels of audit, the good old bronze, silver, and gold kind of thing. And we can, for example, just say, we're just going to do a document audit. In other words, okay, well, what do you have out there? Do you have a document for everything that you think you have? And just review documentary compliance. Obviously, operational compliance is a very different effort, because now you have to really look at how things are happening, who is involved in making those things happen, and then you have to compare to plan documents, which is yet another step. When that happens, it's almost like we either do a horizontal superficial audit, or we do a more narrow in-depth audit. Like, for example, I've certainly conducted audits of exec comp arrangements for 409A compliance, which is this code section on deferred comp, which is literally a big problem, because it's just a code section, but the level of complexity, and we don't even have all the regulations yet. So there is still a level of, well, I guess our best guess is we should do this and not that. So it's a bit uncomfortable. But of course, it's for executives. So there generally is more of a tolerance for
lawyers' time. Also, just so you all know, because 409A imposes penalties on who you ask, on the executive. So it has teeth and not on the one you might think. So usually there can be lawsuits about that where the executive said, whoa, 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 I didn't do the plan terms, you did. And now I have a penalty, you will gross me up. And it's very hard to resist those type of arguments. So it's not a position you want to land, but so we do very in-depth audit of these types of things, but very rarely, all right, well, come check our benefits. And that we don't, because that would be almost a prohibitive type of effort, frankly. So that's kind of my answer to that.
Well, Michel, we're kind of right up on the 1 p.m. hour.
Yes, indeed.
And I haven't seen any other questions in the box unless I missed one.
Yeah, I haven't either. I've been following, but I think we're done. You know, there is one last thing that I will just mention in literally 10 seconds that I didn't even mention, but is a whole other area of head scratching. And it's a key difference, by the way, between Europe and the US, is that in the US, equity-based compensations, meaning compensation that is based on company value or shares, and this maybe sometimes be paid in shares, is much more prevalent than in continental Europe. And it is an area of complexity as well, particularly if you have an equity plan that you implement in multiple jurisdictions. Then there's a whole other level of tax rules that you need to comply with. I think that's a much more technical topic, but I wanted to let certainly the Belgians that are on the line know that for certain levels of hire, there may be more of an expectation to have a participation in an equity program. And that is definitely something that you might want to think of, because there are many ways to do that, but not something you want to do lightly, because the tax rules can get pretty complex about the delivery of shares to an employee, certainly when the employee is not in the same country.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you, Wayne. This was a really interesting webinar. I learned a lot. And I will make sure that everybody gets your contacts and the deck of slides from Wayne and from you, Michel. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Wayne and Michel.
Absolutely.
Last now, I want to make some promotion for our Bakels year kickoff, the Friday the 18th of March in the Balta showroom at 7 p.m. We will have Belgian waffles, Belgian beer, and Belgian food. So that's a good cocktail for a very nice evening. So thank you all for attending, and see you next time.
Thank you so much,
guys.
Ron.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.